Hey there, I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. Imagine holding a passion for something that meant so much to you at a young age. How far would you go to ensure this dream became reality? To what degree would you persevere when setback and seeming failure were right before you? Well, these are questions that many aspiring professionals across industries face early on. How they navigate these moments and soldier on can make all the difference. Well, on today's show, we have a truly inspirational career story to delve into. Our guest is one who did experience challenge early on in his career, but rose well above it. So much so that he is considered to be one of the most authoritative voices in the world of motorsports and broadcast journalism. Of course, I'm referring to none other than the uber-talented and globally recognized F1 host, presenter, reporter, and pundit, Will Buxton. In this episode, we dive into his past, his inspirational journey to the top, what he feels helped him get there, and a bunch more. Plus, we'll share some fascinating insights and stories related to F1 legends like Ayrton Senna, as well as contemporary superstars including Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and others. All up, this episode offers intrigue, inspiration, and will be a true delight to fans of F1, Will Buxton, and the profession of motorsport journalism. So let me more formally introduce Will to you, and we can launch into things. Will Buxton is one of the most popular and highly regarded broadcast journalists in modern-day motorsport. As a host, presenter, reporter, analyst, critic, and pundit, Will has become one of the most recognizable faces in his field. A respected journalist with almost 20 years' experience, an author, and award-winning voiceover artist, few other media celebrities in their field have the reach or breadth of experience and expertise. Now, Will has been involved in motorsport since 2001, taking up key roles in publishing and PR before launching a broadcast career, which has seen him take on Formula One, IndyCar, GP2, GP3, the Race of Champions, and the World Rally Championship for NBC, Fox, and the BBC, amongst others. In 2018, he became Formula One's first digital presenter and the host of all the sport's official digital content in a season which saw him attend and report on his 300th F1 and 600th career race. Much in demand, he has represented and worked with global brands including American Express, A Bathing Ape, Panasonic, and LG. Will has been at the heart of the action for 2 decades, and in the past few years, coming to even greater global attention through his role in the hugely popular Netflix series, Drive to Survive. So, with all of this noted, I'd like to welcome you to my conversation with Will Buxton. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Will?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh man, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I mean, your name, what you stand for, what you're all about. I mean, you're riding high right now, to say the least, I would think. You've got to
Thank
be,
you.
right? This might be an opportune time for listeners who, are familiar with you in terms of your broadcast work, as F1's digital presenter, but they might not know some of the other things here. Your authorship, you already have one book out, you got another one on the way. Your commentating work, the voice work, video games, the brand ambassador stuff, vintage watches, the clothing brand, Psycho Bunny, that tiny little Netflix show, Drive to Survive, as well as some charity work in there on top of that. So like bringing this all together, you're kind of like this big authoritative voice on motorsport.
I started as a print journalist. way back in 2002, 2003 was when I first started out, really as a junior. And every kind of door that opened along the way, it's been a case of really just slamming my foot in the door and making sure it didn't close, so that any of the opportunities that were presented over that time, I tried to take, and I tried to maximize. So I've had periods in PR, periods doing commentary, periods on American television when I was a pit lane reporter. And that all has culminated through to where I find myself today, working for Formula One and being the sort of presenter on F1 TV and getting to do the Netflix show and everything that's come about as a result of that. So it's been a really long career, all based in that initial passion, fanaticism,
Mm-hmm.
that dream, that desire to tell stories and to share my love of the sport and its heroes and the incredible people that work in it with the wider world. And it's been a long, crazy journey.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like,
Loved every second of it.
I bet. I bet. How could you not? And when I was researching for this, just what you were sharing there, I kind of found out some of those details. Like your interest started when you were around 13, and a bit of a somber note. I mean, it was one of your favorite drivers, and obviously a racing legend in Ayrton Senna, and his
Yeah.
unfortunate passing or sudden passing on the circuit that really sort of sparked something within you to actually go into journalism and actually covering the sport itself. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'd been a fan of the sport my whole life growing up in the UK. Formula One was, look, it was never the same size as football or rugby or cricket or anything like that, but soccer, I should say. But it was covered. An amazing commentator in the UK called Murray Walker, who was really the voice of the sport for, I guess, a lot of the world all the way through the 70s, 80s, 90s until he retired. But yeah, Senna was my hero. He was the guy that got me to fall in love with Formula One, and he was killed in a race in 1994. And yeah, I was 13 at the time. You're just getting into that stage of your life where you're trying to figure out what you're interested in. And
That's your hero too, right? I mean,
oh, totally,
for a 13-year-old
totally.
boy, yeah.
And my dad bought me a copy of Autosport magazine and Motoring News that week, and I kind of read the pages of that and read what the experienced journalists had to say about the situation. And in that, I kind of found a way to come to terms with the loss of my hero. And it was literally that week, bam, that's what I want to do. I want to write about the sport. I want to share my love of it so that somebody who also loves it can read those words and feel that they have kindred spirits out there who understand them and who get it. And that was where the journey began. And one of my cousins was a writer at the Times, so I spoke to him and said, "Look, what do I do? How do I get into journalism?" And he was very supportive and gave me loads of great advice. At the time, your media studies or journalism degrees weren't seen really as very serious degrees. They are now, 20, 30 years later. They're much better tools to teach people the skill set that you need. And in hindsight, I kind of wish that I had done some proper studying about, what you need, because nowadays those college courses or university courses have so much more than just this is how you write. There's media law. All of the complex machinations that you need when you get into this world, dealing with libel and everything else like that. Things that would have been really, really useful. But he said, just do a topic, do a subject that you enjoy, preferably a humanities subject where you can write and find your voice. So I loved history. I was always pretty argumentative and loud and vocal. So I did politics. I studied politics and I wrote my university thesis on the politics of Formula One, which my lecturers hated. But my kind of heroes over at Formula One magazine, I sent them a copy of the dissertation. They loved it and they gave me a bit of work experience off the back of it. And at the end of those couple of weeks of work experience, I turned up with a pillow and a sleeping bag and sort of refused to leave the office. I said, I'm staying. And they said, don't worry, we were going to ask you to stay anyway. Do you want to be our staff writer? So I was a real junior, right at the bottom, just up from kind of making coffees. And that was nearly 25 years ago. That was my first job in the sport.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, there's so much imbued within that story. I think that's useful for young people to hear is like, one, it might have been easy when your university course where your lecturers or your professors like, no, this is garbage. This is no good.
Oh, it was terrible.
Just, all right, fine. Like I don't have this. I don't have a skill or a talent for it. But you're like, no, there's a certain stubbornness, I guess, to you that like, well, you're still going to like put it out there into the world and see what happens and go right to that magazine. Like that, I think that's a point right there that like, again, it'd be easy to give up there, but you didn't.
Yeah, totally. And I did, I went for jobs at Autosport magazine and other places, and they said, one of the roles I went for was as an editorial assistant, and they said my knowledge was too specialized in Formula One. It wasn't wide enough on motorsport in general. I went for jobs at Radio 5 Live with the BBC and all of that. And, it wasn't the case that the first thing I applied for, I got. I have, a bag full of rejection letters. And over the last 25 years, rejection after rejection after rejection. You get down to the last 2 or 3 for a job. Sorry, you're not quite right for it. Okay, well, you move on. I knew what I wanted to do. I think my parents were always very supportive of me in this dream, in this goal, actually for both my sister and I, in what she wanted to do. She wanted to be an actress. She wanted to be on the West End. And they said to both of us, look, it's amazing you have a dream. You have to realize that the dream you have is very specific and the chances of achieving that are minimal, but you have this passion. We're going to back you. We're going to support you. Please, if you do one thing, go to university, get a degree, get something locked in, so you've got something to fall back on if this dream doesn't pay off. But go for it, and go for it with our blessing. And sure enough, I ended up doing this. My sister ended up on the West End in Sound of Music and Wicked, and
get out of here.
All of that. So that was kind of
some talent in that family.
But I think that came from the positive enforcement of our parents, who didn't say, "Don't be stupid. That's a ridiculous." Like this, the chances of that are, infinitely small.
Yeah.
They just said, "Go for it," and give it your all, give it everything. Because if you're going to do this, you have to commit to it, and you have to give it everything. But have a backup, just in case it doesn't work out. And we both did. My sister now teaches. And I'm now doing TV, which is really far away from what I wanted to do originally, which was to write. That positivity, that real positive enforcement was a huge part of what got me to where I was, and that belief from them in me that I could do it. And obviously then the belief from those who ended up giving me jobs. So I was very lucky in the early days when I was writing my thesis. I went to the Autosport show. I met David Tremaine, who was a journalist I looked up to massively, who was good enough to give me his phone number and was a constant source of inspiration and support. He put me on to Joe Sayward, who was and still is one of the foremost journalists dealing with the politics of Formula One. And I said, I'm writing my thesis on the politics of Formula One. And he sent me this document, which was like 15,000 words on the entire history of politics in Formula One. And my thesis only needed to be 12,000 words. So how I ended up writing a terrible thesis, I have no idea, because I had more than I needed from Joe. And they were both incredibly supportive in those early days. I wrote for Joe's website, grandprix.com, for free when I was a kid. And David gave me this couple of weeks of work experience. And that was a real shot in the arm, a real kind of feeling of support, and that I could do it, and that there was a space for me in this thing that I wanted to do.
A certain degree of like gusto, like just going for it as well, like imbued within your own personality. I picked up in the research of this talk here that at one point, maybe in your early 20s, like you were going all over Europe, skimping on food, basic necessities, just to be able to follow the sport, from circuit to circuit, to be able to write about it and to see what was going on, and really fully going after this dream. You were going to pry yourself into it before that door could close, right?
Completely. Literally, it's like, you're hanging on by your fingertips, but you have to hold on and summon the strength to just drag yourself back up. Yeah, so I was writing for Formula One magazine, and it got shut down a week before the 2004 season. Literally a week before the season started. So yeah, I went to see my parents. I was like, what do I do? They said, you can't give up now. You've had a taste of it for 18 months. What do you need? I was like, I need a pass and I need to get to the races. And so the FIA were very, very good. Richard Woods was their head of communications, and he said, just find an outlet, any outlet, and I'll get you a pass for the season. I have no idea what he saw in me, but he thought I was worthy of that. And I went to a free newspaper in London, the one that you could pick up on the underground. And you leave it on your seat, then the next person comes and read it. And they printed however many copies they printed, but with the pass on readership, it was hitting millions of people a day. So I was able to go to the FIA and say, here's the outlet. And they were like, great, you got a pass. And then it needs to get to the races. So my parents had some savings. And again, they put it into a camper van for me on the proviso that I pay them back, which I did over time, over many years. And for that year, I drove to all the races. Couldn't afford to fly, drove to the races. And yeah, I was only earning a couple of £100 a week at that time. And that money went predominantly on fuel. Yeah, it went on gas to get me to the races. So it was either gas or food, and I chose gas. And the other journalists and the teams would feed me at the races, fatten me up so I'd survive the next 5 days until I got to the next Grand Prix. And that was how I lived for a year. And at the end of that year, they were launching GP2, which is now known as Formula 2. New championship. They saw what I was doing in the camper van, liked it, thought it was pretty rock and roll, said, "Do you want to be our press officer?" Because I loved, in those days, I and still do, loved hanging out in the junior Formula paddocks, getting to know the kids coming through, their stories, because these were the ones that were going to define the future. And so I got to know the guys in the junior formulas, and they wanted me to be their press officer. So I went over, moved to Switzerland, where the championship was based, lived in Lausanne, worked in Geneva, which was scary and terrifying. I was 23.
And so much fun, I bet, though, too, right?
Ah, come on. It was amazing.
Come on.
It was amazing
yeah.
because, and Lausanne was a big student town.
Yeah.
So I was hanging out with students, but I was earning. So I had a great time, like a great time. And then I was
a whole different
living my dream,
maybe.
and yeah, exactly. But living my dream and working and going to races. And I was promoted to director of communications in my second year. Did 2 years then as director of communications, and after 3 years, I was like, I miss writing. In PR, you take the meat off the bones, and you give the bones. And as a journalist, your job is to put the meat back on the bones. I always felt I was more the person that wanted to put the meat on the bones than take it off it. I didn't like holding the truth back or being...
Yeah. Inject your opinion and your feeling. And
Yeah. And when the boss is like, this is what we have to put out in the world, and the journalist side of me is like, but that's not true. It didn't sit easily with me. So I loved it. It was a wonderful 3 years. It taught me so much, particularly about, that other side of the coin. So when I went back to journalism, it was really easy to kind of figure out what had been left out and work your way back around to put the meat back on the bones. But a huge part of the process, a huge part of learning the job, learning the world, but also getting to know teams, drivers who would come to define the future of the sport. Fred Vasseur, who's now the Ferrari team principal, he ran one of the junior teams there in ART, along with Nicolas Tutt, who has become one of the most influential driver managers of the last 20 years. I worked with Lewis Hamilton. I worked with Nico Rosberg. I worked with these guys when they were kids coming through the ranks.
Yeah. Didn't you get the first interview with Verstappen? At Spa, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Based off of that sort of approach. You had an existing relationship with him when he was quite young.
A kid. Yeah. And for a long time, I ended up commentating on GP2 when I went back to being a journalist. And being the lead commentator for GP2 meant that I'd spend a lot of time down in the paddock getting to know these kids. And sometimes, if they got up to Formula One and graduated to Formula One, I was kind of a familiar face. So I would be an easy first interview for them when they got out of the car. They knew I wasn't going to rip them to shreds. I wasn't going to softball them, but they knew that
there was something there, the relationship, familiarity.
Bingo. And so that was very, very positive. So those early formative years were key. But actually, we talk about those early formative years and what they taught me. And you were very gracious at the start to sort of talk about how I approach things and that enthusiasm and that passion. When I lived in the camper van, I was camping with all the fans. So when I came back from my day of work, it was back into the campsite, sitting around the campfire, having a few beers, chewing the fat about the day. And their questions and what they wanted to know were fascinating because I was meeting people from different walks of life, different countries, and everybody wanted to know different things, but on similar subjects. And so my job then was not only to go in and write for the newspaper, but to come back with stories that they wanted to hear and those facts. And that's kind of informed everything I've done since, which is to remember that ultimately the fans in the campsites or the fans back at home, I'm still what I was then and have been my whole life, which is a fan who got incredibly lucky to get to do this thing that I love. My job, as I see it, is to bring all the other fans in with me and to say, come and see this thing and let me show you the things that you want to see and the things that you want to know. And let me take you on this tour and let me share it with you. That's what I've always seen as my job, to allow them access into that, because the paddock is the place they all wanted to be. They all wanted to go. And you can't buy a ticket to get in there, only if you're working. And so my job was to bring them all with me.
Yeah. You're the de facto sort of like extension of what they are and what they represent and what they want, And I think a couple things in listening to you describe all of this is like, we've already spoken about this notion of passion. Like clearly that's there. Was with you early on and it's continued right on through. It's just part of who you are, I think, in relationship to the sport. But then also too, I'm picking up this notion of like reflection, reflection on some of these elements of, again, what do the fans want? Like I can't forget this side of it. In speaking of the sport and how it's grown and how popular it is, I think for some people, it might be easy to kind of get caught up in all of it and believing the hype, maybe about the sport, maybe about yourself, and sort of forgetting these elements. But in doing so, if you are doing that, you're throwing away a lot of what's gotten you there, right? And I think probably a lot of people succumb to that, but clearly that's something that hasn't occurred with you.
You're right. There are two distinct bubbles that you're dealing with. One is the bubble of fanaticism, when you can get very carried away with the perception of what you believe to be true without any foundation of knowing whether it is or it isn't. But then there's also the bubble that exists within the F1 paddock, where you can be blinded to what's going on outside of that. And you have to try to mesh the two together, because you want to inform and you want to engage the fan base. It's increasingly more difficult in a fractured and reactionary social media age, where beliefs can be formed in a moment and permeate that entire fan base, to turn it around and say, well, look, that's not really how it is, and this is how it is. And then the reaction from that side to be, well, of course you'd say that, you're inside the bubble.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that and bridge it and bring it together? It's very, very hard, because you don't want to come across as being condescending. And you also want to be sort of cognizant of the fact that, oh, well, am I in the bubble? Am I not seeing this as other people see it? So trying to balance that's kind of tough.
Sounds like it. Yeah. And like that's a deep level insight that, you wouldn't necessarily learn about. Like I'm really glad that you shared that, because again, an aspiring journalist or somebody who would like to get into covering this sport or something else similar, like these are issues that professionals like yourself kind of have to wrestle with and try to find that balance and strike it in the right way.
And the other part of that as well is, when you come in having loved it your whole life and you come in as a fan, how do you maintain that independence? How do you maintain or try to keep yourself on the straight and narrow, and make sure that A, you're not overly negative, or B, you're not overly positive, that you actually deal with things in the right way, despite the fact that you're a fan? Because can you have editorial independence if you're not editorial independent? It's one of the big things that obviously that I get hit with a lot working for Formula One. People will say that I'm a mouthpiece for Formula One, that I can't ever have my own opinions, that I always have to toe the line. And in some cases, that's true. I'm never going to sit there and slag off, a decision that's been made ultimately by my paymasters, because that's a very good way to get fired. If it got to that point, I simply wouldn't give an opinion on it. Rather than give a disingenuous opinion that I didn't agree with, I just wouldn't comment. And that's the best way to go around that, I think. But it has got me in trouble, because I have said things I shouldn't have done, and I have taken stands on things that I shouldn't have done. And were I still an independent journalist, that would be absolutely fine. And up until I started working for Formula One, I could have those very strong opinions, which I've had to temper recently. That's not to say that I am given lines that I have to say, or that I'm told you must say this or you must say
Gray
that.
area, right?
Yeah, but you learn it yourself and you figure out, that, and it's not even about not biting the hand that feeds, but my role with F1 TV, I'm there to bring the news, to bring the stories, but there's an element of promotion to that, to promote the sport, to try to always see the positive in everything that's happening.
Well, it's a business. You're there to
absolutely
help grow it and everything associated with it. So like it's all part of it. Like it's these shades of gray, it sounds like to me. And
very much so.
Probably with a lot of experience, it gets a little bit easier. Perhaps, probably somebody who's starting out, this would be a field full of landmines,
But there's also, as you're involved in the sport, you naturally, you get to know the teams, you get to know the drivers, but you can't have favorites. Your job, and, it's still a passion project for most people to get to Formula One. The vast majority are Formula One fans because it requires so much sacrifice, because it requires so much time to get there. Very much as the drivers, it takes an entire life to get to Formula One. I was very lucky to get a job with a Formula One magazine when I was very young, but I did still spend the time after that working in the junior formulas, finding my way back through. Most journalists, most people in any job within the sport, again, mechanic, engineer, designer, whatever it might be, they have come through the ranks, either in other forms of motorsport, or if you're a designer or an aerodynamicist, through aeronautics or whatever it might be, to get to Formula One. It's not often something that you achieve in your early 20s. It happens much later in life. You don't get there without that love, without that passion for what you're doing. But you have to have a professional distance from those that you're reporting on. You can't come in and be like, I'm a massive Lewis Hamilton fan.
Right.
You have to keep it clean across everybody. So one weekend I'll have the Sergio Perez fans saying that I hate Checo. And the next weekend I'll have people saying I hate Max. And the next weekend I'll have people saying I hate Lewis. And the same thing will happen the week after, where everyone's like, oh, he loves Lewis. I figure so long as I'm pissing everybody off, then I'm doing something.
You're doing something right then.
Right. Because it's not about having favorites. You have to be honest in your appraisal of who's had a good race, who's had a bad race. And the second that you have those, that you have a favorite, or that fanaticism, plays too heavy a role, yeah, you're absolutely done. And also, this is a dangerous sport, and there is forever the potential that somebody that you report on, that you share your life with, will be taken, and that has happened during my career. It's happened on a couple of occasions. Jules Bianchi. I loved Jules, and we would play squash together, and we'd hang out. And when he was killed, it taught me a very valuable lesson that I had to take a step back and not be as friendly with the drivers that I had been before, because that was very, very hard to do that broadcast. And in the moment that it's not looking good. And when it's your mate, that makes it 100 times harder still. So you have to then put that emotional barrier in there, which is that professional distance.
Yeah. It's an interesting angle there that truthfully I hadn't even considered, like I would think that perhaps, like, maybe it depends on the person. You could still have that relationship, and then you put on the work hat and it's now time to cover. But
it's hard. Yeah, it's really hard. And you want to have a good relationship with everybody, but then you still need to be able to ask the hard questions at the hard moments. And you don't want them to turn away and go, I thought we were mates. It's like, yeah, but also I'm here to do a job, and so it's all of those facets kind of combine together to allow you to do your job. It's like, I remember talking to David Tremaine's a great example of someone who, he was a journalist through the Ayrton Senna years. And if you ever wrote anything negative about Ayrton, he would just he'd stop talking to you, because he viewed it as disloyalty.
Insult. Yeah,
An insult, exactly. So again, where do you draw the line? How do you maintain those professional relationships at the same time as being able to be critical?
Yeah.
And criticism is such a huge point of this, because you have to be able to say who's doing a good job, who's doing a bad job, without them going, oh, I thought we were mates.
Yeah. And also too, like there's another point to all of this as well. I think like for some of these drivers that they're all young, like well, most of them,
Oh, yeah.
aside from Alonso, but like they're all quite young and what they're going through, what world that they're living in right now is unlike any other. Like they're in this select group globally that has this really
Yes.
unique shared experience. It's
Yes.
almost unfathomable, like to think like how that would be and how they're navigating it and what they're doing and what their life is all about. It's hard to relate in that sense. And it must be interesting for somebody like yourself who's trying to understand them. It's almost impossible to do, again, because it's just so hard to relate. And like having the right connection with them, but then also trying to keep this line that we're speaking about right now intact.
And the vast majority of racing drivers are quite socially awkward because from the age of 5, they have been racing and they have been brought up in this world that is purely about competition, that is purely about selfishness, because you have to be solely focused on yourself and on what you're doing, your goals, your dreams, no one else's. Where you've been told from day one that you are the best at what you do, and you have to believe that you're the best. So from the age of 5, these kids have grown up with this God complex where they can do no wrong and they can admit no fault, because to do so is a negative which will stop them reaching their dreams. Yeah, it's a weakness. You can't show weakness, mental, physical. You just can't. And all the way through junior formulas, the pressure, the spotlight isn't as bright. And then suddenly you get to Formula One and everything you do is micro-analyzed.
And suddenly you're coming in like, 17th, you're in the back of the pack.
These kids who are used to winning races, winning championships, and on Sunday in Formula One, for half the grid, a good result is scoring 1 point by finishing in 10th. That's it. And these are kids who have won titles, who have won, hundreds of races on their way through. You look at someone like Logan Sargent, who could have been Formula 3 champion, narrowly missed out on being Formula 3 champion, was a very competent driver in Formula 2, multiple race winner, gets to Formula 1. And all the way last year, people were like, don't know if he's quite up to it. And then we're questioning whether he should be back this year. Now he's back this year. And again, those same, he shouldn't be here.
Yeah. Well, like the perception, he's garbage. He's one of the 20th best drivers in the entire world, but you have this intense,
And the barometer, the level is so high. It's no shame to not quite be at the level required, because to not quite be at the level required still puts you head and shoulders above 99% of anyone who's ever steps in a racing car. It's just the level is that
they're still
high.
Kind of kids and like trying to develop their own sense of maturity, navigating this crazy world. Like it must be incredibly difficult for them, but then also too, like, again, for somebody like yourself who's trying to cover this and understand it and understand their perspectives on where they're coming from and why they're answering a question a certain way. Yeah. Must be an interesting element to the work is what I'm trying to drive at here. But
it's fascinating, but you have to try to not be a pound shop psychoanalyst with no training in that, trying to figure out what's going on in their heads. All you can deal with is who they are and what they show. And you can't judge based on a liking for somebody or a dislike. If somebody rubs you up the wrong way, you have to deal with everybody in the same way. And so then you do have your barometer then, which is the stopwatch, and the stopwatch never lies. So you take it on that. And are they good enough compared to their teammate, who is the ultimate competitor because they're the only person with the same car? What's the person on the other side of the garage doing? What are they saying? What's their feedback? And how does this relate to that? How does it differ? And then you can start to gain an understanding of where they truly are.
I get this other question here, kind of shifting off of what we've just been speaking about. In terms of like a day in the life for you, I've interviewing an NFL beat reporter once, and the schedule that he had in terms of covering a professional, American football team was pretty intense during the season. Obviously with the travel that you have and everything else, I could imagine it being pretty intense as well on your side of the fence. But I'd love to hear this. And I think listeners would love to hear about this.
Let's run through last week or week before last. So Tuesday morning, up at about 5 with my 10-month-old daughter, breakfast and then a bit of play and pack my suitcase, get in the car, drive to Heathrow Airport. check in for a flight to Qatar, change in Qatar, and fly from Qatar to Shanghai. The car takes us to the hotel and check in there and have some dinner and get ready and get prepped for the week ahead. We'll have done a lot of prep work on the flight and in the days leading up to that as well. A lot of research, hours and hours and hours over the day. Take meetings, Zoom chats and whatever for our meetings on how we're going to go into the weekend. Make sure that you land fully prepped on the history and where you're at in the championship season. Thursday is your first day at the track. We'll get in at about 8 o'clock in the morning, leave about 7 o'clock at night. And throughout that day, your day is filled with interviews of drivers, team bosses, personnel within the paddock, and then also walking around and talking to teams and talking to everybody that really about what's going on with all of the different storylines. So they will be about the track, about the cars and the upgrades, the drivers themselves, how they're feeling, political machinations and what's going on in the sport beyond that. At the moment, we're in the middle of silly season. So literally talking to drivers and their managers about where might they end up next year, trying to get a feel for where that lay of the land is and who might be landing where. And then we film the weekend warm-up show at the end of the day, which is about a 40-minute live show. And then we jump on the bus, which drives us back to the hotel. It was about an hour and a half to the hotel from the track. Get back, bit of dinner, decompress, play a bit of my guitar. I got a nice travel guitar for my birthday from my wife. So sit on the bed, play a bit of guitar, go to bed. Get up the next morning and it's a sprint weekend. So again, we're leaving the hotel at 7 a.m. We're into the track for 8:30, meetings, quick tour around the paddock, chat to people, who's got what upgrades. At that point, the cars are being rolled out into the pit lane for show and tell. So we go to the cars, interview team personnel about the upgrades they've put on their cars for this weekend, head back to the office, quick toilet stop, and then we do our preview show for the practice session. Then I run straight from a preview practice show straight into the pit lane to do an hour of live updates in commentary, showing everybody into the garages, what updates everybody's running, anything that happens during the session, red flags, yellow flags, any issues on the cars. And a lot of that is it's looking in and you're looking at the car and figuring out what they're working on, because very rarely will the teams ever tell you any issues that they have. So you've got to look at it and figure it out and realize, okay, they've got an issue with the suspension, or that brake shouldn't be on fire, or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And then as soon as that's done, literally 5 minutes before the end of the session, run out of the pit lane, take my tabard off, and I'm back front of camera for the show that wraps that session up. Then we had a couple of hours where, if you're lucky, you've got time to grab lunch. If not, again, you're touring around the paddock, you're talking to people, you're figuring out how their sessions have gone, who's happy, who's sad, what changes do they need to make, because you're straight into sprint qualifying. So it's a preview show for sprint qualifying. We get that done. And then at that point, I'm up in the office watching the action, because I need to have everything in my head over what's gone on in that hour so I can get back downstairs and then present the post show and try to bring some context to everything that's happened in that. There's then interviews that take place after that. I don't get to do those because they're happening while I'm doing the show. And then we'll leave the track about 7 p.m., 8 p.m., back to the hotel for 9:30 p.m., 10 p.m., bit of dinner, play a bit of guitar, get to bed around midnight, and then up again the next morning at, if you're lucky, you can get up in time to meditate, go to the gym, have a bit of breakfast and jump on the bus. But if it's been a late one, then you just literally up, shower, dressed, on the bus, into the track, and then you're straight into your sprint. And for your sprint, you have a pre-show, about a half-hour pre-show. The sprint itself, again, I'll be back in the office for that, taking notes, making sure I've got everything in my head down for a post-show. Then there's a 3-hour break, and again, you're running around the paddock, finding stuff out, maybe doing some interviews, but mostly talking. Who's changed what and why. And then you have your big pre-show for qualifying itself, big show, post-show for that. And again, we're out. And then race day itself. Race day is a really, really intense day. And I love it because you have rehearsals, you have a ton of time to walk around and figure out what's going on. I did the driver parade in Shanghai. So that's about a half hour out on the track, interviewing the drivers in front of the grandstands. Really
cool.
Huge buzz, great fun. And then you're straight out of that straight into your pre-race show, which is an hour. And whether I'm hosting that or I'm a pundit on that, it's probably my favorite time of the weekend because the intensity is really building up at this point. And there's nothing like a high pressure live TV show. So we will have had meetings and gone through what we want to cover in that 1 hour. And in Shanghai, I don't think any one of the segments that we had was more than 2 minutes long. And you've got to be to your second in order to get out of that and into the pre-recorded package that allows us the time to walk to our next space. Bam, bam, bam. It's a very small crew where there are only 3 of us on air in China. So it's how do you utilize all those people and then where'd you get? So we start at one point of the pit lane, move to another part of the pit lane. Then we're in another feature and that gives us the time to walk onto the grid. We'll throw up to the commentary box, which allows us to then walk to another part of the grid and everything is bump, bump, bump. So it all works and it's seamless and smooth. And I never carry notes with me. So I have a brilliant producer, Jo. She's amazing. And Jo and I go through the running order before we go on air. So I make sure that I know where we're going before we go on air. And Jo just keeps me honest and she'll just give me like a couple of word keys so I know where I'm off to next and what I'm talking about next. And that keeps me honest. And then they'll throw to me at the back of the grid. I do an 8-minute grid walk. And for me, a grid walk is all about condensing the entire hour of the show into 8 minutes so that if you tune in for the last 10 minutes of the show, you get all the information that you need. So again, it's not scripted, it's not planned, but I have 8 minutes of talking constantly about every single driver from P20 to P1, throw to the anthem on time, bam, anthem. Out of the anthem, wrap, couple of interviews, and then the race broadcast starts. And again, we're then up in the office, just making sure that I've got everything in my head before I go down and do a live post-race show. Again, that is not planned. So you can't have a running order for that. That just comes as it comes. Drivers walk on the show and you're very much in the moment and you just have to roll with the punches and whatever's coming and just make it happen. You have a baseline skeleton of what you think the show will be and what goes where. And again, you're just throwing the meat onto the skeleton as you go along and hoping that the thing that forms at the end looks presentable. And I love that. I absolutely love that.
That sounds fun. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I literally finished the show. I had 5 minutes to make the bus, get to the bus, get back to the hotel, quick shower, 30-minute turnaround, bags onto the bus again to the airport, Shanghai, Qatar, home. And I landed 1 p.m. Monday lunchtime in the UK, back home for hugs and cuddles. And that was that. Yeah, that's a week. You're a pinball. You're constantly pinging everywhere. And it's a buzz, man. It's a buzz.
It sounds like it. And to layer all of this in a different country, in a different country each time, so then you have the cultural elements to all of this that are taking place. Maybe you're just so involved and enraptured with everything around you in terms of the job that you're not maybe picking up on all of that, but it's there too, right? I mean,
yes. And that's lovely is when you get back to the hotel and you're heading out for dinner and you get to experience a little bit of where you are. You can never absorb it completely. And chances are, you won't be staying in the middle of a big city or anywhere that's particularly cool. So you just find your little hangouts that
well, it's probably the people that like your colleagues as well, like that too.
Yeah,
like the relationships you build.
It's a
with
touring
those
family.
People. Yeah, it would have to be, right?
And that's great because we have, like anything, if you want something to be a success, it's all about the teams. And throughout the last 20 years, I've been incredibly fortunate to be part of amazing teams. And it's so important to learn from every single person that's on your team. And also to make sure the role that I have now very much being kind of like at the front and center of all these shows. I think it's really important to be that person, to be that conduit that allows them to be the best of themselves. And if they have ideas or whatever they want to or can bring into the show, make sure they have the platform to be able to do that. Because if one person's having a bad day or one person doesn't feel themselves, and that the whole thing can collapse, you got to be there as that motivator to make sure that when you go on air that you're the band leader, right? You're James Brown, and that everybody knows you've got it and you can hold it. But the whole thing only works if the team feels confident and the team feels comfortable to be able to do what they do, whether it's the sound ops, whether it's the camera crew, whether it's the producers, the directors, everyone's got to feel safe.
It almost mirrors what we were speaking about earlier of like the extreme notion of what F1 represents. Of course, the teams and like precision, and working together so closely and everyone coming together with this common goal. But also on your side of things, like you are part of this universe as well. So like the coverage teams and how they operate and the way you just described it, I think it's a mirror image. Like the whole thing is built on this, right?
Yeah, totally. If you're a presenter, a pundit, and any television show that you see, particularly live TV, because cannot explain how hard live television is. It's so tough.
The way you just described it there, there's a certain intensity there that,
it's never going to be perfect. You are always going to screw something up. It's going to happen.
But the expectation's probably always there for it to be perfect, right?
But that's the drug. That's what keeps you coming back, is the perfect show, like the perfect lap. If you're the host or the pundit or whoever, you're very much the focal point, much like the driver is at the team. But you're never going to get the most out of it unless you have that full team that is incredible. So you need your strategist, who will be your producer or your race engineer. So actually, so strategist is probably your director. Your chief engineer is your producer who's in your ear. You need to have a great strategy, so you need to have a great run plan, right? You need a great pit crew who are there to get the wheels on and get the wheels off, and that's your they're your sound ops. It's your camera team. It's all of that. You need a great floor manager. You need every single facet of a race broadcast is that part of the team, and without everybody there being the best at what they do and also having the freedom, the comfort, the confidence to be able to do it and hit their marks. The best days are the days where you come off air and everyone's bouncing because they've all had a great show. Then you've hit it. And that is the best. To be a part of that, to be a part of a team that runs like that that's the joy. That's what I love about broadcasting is the teamwork that goes into it. Because and you don't see it. You don't see them, but they're everything. It's all about teamwork.
Yeah. I would love to know, like transitioning over into this water cooler story segment really quickly. And I don't know if this is a story that you'd like to tell again. You've probably told it like 8 billion times over about being in the Ferrari Junior Academy, like training.
Yeah.
And you're racing with, current, contemporary drivers like Max Verstappen, Lance Stroll. I think he was your teammate, and Nicholas Latifi.
Yeah, that was.
Well.
I mean, listen. Over the last 20 odd years, I've had some amazing experiences as a result of doing this crazy job. Got to drive a Formula One car a couple of times. Been to every corner of the world. Done some mad stuff. But getting invited to go and compete in open wheel against the best up and coming young drivers was crazy, because I was pretty old at the time. I was in my mid-30s. And here's all these 15, 16-year-olds who were just, the next generation. And as it turned out, quite incredible racing drivers, particularly when you look at someone like Verstappen, who it was obvious from the outset was something very, very special indeed. Yeah, little kind of Formula 4 cars, Tatus F4 cars. And I was massively off the pace. My first session, I'd never raced nothing really in my life other than go-karts with mates. No, nothing. So I was like 18 seconds off in the first practice session.
Going from that into...
And then gradually cutting my time down over the weekend. And I think my fastest race lap in the end was about 2.5 seconds off max, which I'll take. I'll take that.
Wow. Yeah. Hell yeah.
What was really good was at that time I'd been commentating for years. I'd been reporting for years. And I'd spoken about things like dirty air and, getting clag on your tires and slipstreams and downforce and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I got the theory. And it's easy to, you do your commentary with the theory in mind. And this is what we know it looks like on the screen and the effect that it has on the drivers. but to actually be in the cockpit. And the
Experiencing
first
it all.
time that you're getting faster and faster and faster, and then your engineer tells you can go way faster through that corner. Like, I literally can't. They're like, that's what the wings are for. Just trust me. You can go like 20 miles an hour faster through the corner. So you do. And you're like, and the first time, and then it sticks, and you're like, the wings are actually working. This is what it's supposed to feel like. Oh my God, it's on rails. Okay, now I understand downforce.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I had to pull off line to let the guys lap me. And I had to pull onto all of the bits of rubber. And then I came back on it, and the car's just bouncing up and down like this. Okay, now I understand what dirt on your tires feels like. Or if I flat spotted a tire and that same vibration going down the straight so you can't see. Okay, now I understand what a flat spot is. Feel slipstream for the first time. Okay, now I know what that feels like. Started raining and I'm on slick tires and it felt like I was on an ice rink. Okay, now I know what that feels like. So all of these things that were just theory suddenly started to become real. And that gave me such a massive appreciation of things I'd only ever spoken about, but never really fully, properly understood.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. I mean, like the professional side, definitely. Like, everything you just explained there. On the personal side, like what a thrill that must have been.
Ah,
You know?
amazing. Incredible.
Telling
Yeah.
these stories and looking back, like at some point when you're hanging out all of this, and reflecting on the career and all that you've been part of, like some of those moments, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
And
gonna be special.
listen, I will talk about those for years
Is
because,
there anything else that stands out outside of that story, or really quickly?
oh my goodness. I mean, there's just, I mean, tons. I remember one of the nicest things I did was when I was still a print journalist. I managed to convince F1 Racing magazine to send me to Brazil to do an interview with Bruno Senna, who was Ayrton Senna's nephew. And he was making his Formula One debut. And so I'd go to Brazil to interview Bruno. And I went out there, and Bruno said, "Do you want to go to the farm?" And I was like, "Yes, I want to go to the farm," because there is only one farm in the Senna family, and it was Ayrton's. So we went to Ayrton's house. And I'm literally hanging out in Ayrton Senna's house with his nephew, eating lunch. And then Bruno's like, let's go look around. And so we went down to, this lockup that he had there, which was full of Ayrton's old stuff and his jet skis. And then we went to the kart track that Ayrton had built. And then there were all these barns full of old go-karts, and I recognized Ayrton's go-kart from photographs I'd seen 20, 30 years before, covered in an inch of dust because they'd sat there untouched since his death. And just that, for me, it was like this full circle moment of the whole reason I got into the sport. And I was literally just there at his house, hanging out with his nephew, who I got to know through GP2 and had become a good mate. And now I'm reporting and writing the story of his nephew about to make his F1 debut here at Ayrton's house. Like, that was, like, talking about that now, it's like, it's all just like goosebumpy.
Unreal, man. Unreal. Yeah.
That was crazy. But I thought my career was over when the magazine was shut down at the start of '04. Doing the year in the camper van, I didn't think I'd last longer than a year. Every single step, I've been incredibly grateful and just assumed that it wouldn't last. So there will come a point where I sit down and I go back over everything that's happened. But really, every day is a memory that I never thought I'd get to have, and I cherish them all.
Yeah, I'm definitely picking up on that. And I'd reckon that's a big part of your success, perhaps, is that because I think, again, like it'd be easy for someone who's reached, the point at which you've reached in your career right now, like you're up there, you're up on that hill. And it might be easy for somebody just to be like, to rest on their laurels a little bit there or allow it even worse to go to their head, and lose touch with reality. But it seems to me that you're constantly reflecting on a lot of these things and not losing touch with that 20-year-old self, who was completely
I try not
enthralled.
to.
And well, I think it comes across, and like at least in this conversation and following your career a little bit here as well, like I think it comes across on air and how you engage with others. Like I think it's, at least this is, again, something
That means
I'm
a
picking
lot.
up
No,
on.
thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, I don't know. I guess if you think it's going to end, every single day, then you just make the most of it.
You study any of the greats of any sport, the greats of any profession. It's that type of humbleness as well, I think, and respect for the craft that you can always be a little bit better, and that's ultimately pushes people forward, right?
1000%. It's there are so many great broadcasters that I look up to, and when you see them do what they do and make it look so effortless, and then you go and you do your own thing, and I would never want to compare what I do with people that I look up to, but you get your own little taste of it, and then you realize, oh wow, okay, they are another level, and how do I get there? And one thing that's really important is, I watch back every single thing that we do. I watch back everything, rewatch it, even the bits that make you cringe and go, oh, that was, yeah, I remember that bit. Wasn't happy about it then, even less happy with it now. And you got to go back, you got to rewatch, you got to constantly learn. And from the good bits and the bad bits, don't get too confident on the good bits. Just be like, okay, yeah, that worked. Remember that for the future. And the bits that didn't work, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? What can I change? How can that be better in the future? It's you say it's craft, and everyone talks about the, what is it, 10,000 hours?
Yeah.
That you have to put in, but you can't rest. The second that you rest on your laurels, the second you phone it in, it does show. And we are in an environment now with the amount of incredibly skilled content creators that exist in the wider world of social media, be they TikTok creators, be they on YouTube, whatever their platform. There are so many skilled content creators that if you don't bring something that is genuine into the marketplace, you get sniffed out very, very quickly. You cannot bullshit your way through it. You have to be on your game at all times. You got to care about it. And if you don't care about it, go and do something else. You've got to work. You have to work. It's so key.
Absolutely. And, really quickly here as well, like in preparing for this, conversation today, we were speaking off air. I think I'm up to about 124, 125 episodes now. And I get this email about an hour before this is going to go off that you had joined the Zoom chat early in all of these episodes. Not one guest has done that. And it had me freaking out a little bit. Like, oh, did I mess up the time zone here? But no, it was like, it was you just going, like you shared with me. You just want to make sure the mic was good, the computer was good. Like, it's that attention to detail as well, and like caring enough to do these types of things. And I think that again speaks to the point that you're just making, and like the dedication to, what you're all about and who you are. Yeah, I like it. I think I bring a lot of this up is like, I think a lot of this is like incredibly important information or insights for young people. Like. There's no easy way. There's no shortcuts to any of this, right? It's kind of put out there that it's like that, but reality, it's anything but.
It's hard. It's really hard. But it's the same. I think it's the same as any job, any role. You get out of it what you put into it, and you if you phone it in, you're going to get to the end of it and think, well, I could have done that better, and I didn't really get any satisfaction out of it. It's all about the work.
On that note, Will, I mean, you've gone well above and beyond in terms of sharing, in this episode.
It's been a joy.
Giving a lot of time to all of this, and I'm incredibly respectful of it. And I know listeners are absolutely going to love all of this from start to finish. I know I certainly did. So yeah, I can't thank you enough. Really quickly too, I know you have a book coming out, and maybe you want to plug that as well.
I do. Grand Prix comes out a little bit later this year. Been very sort of mindful over recent years with Drive to Survive that the fan base of Formula One is booming. But this is a fan base which has been brought in through this great series and thrust into a quite complex, at times quite negative social media space where they are maligned as being new fans. And we all have been new fans at a certain point, whatever the sport is we love, or the band that we love, or whatever. There was a time when we heard that first song by our favorite artist and we knew nothing about them. There was a time when we caught our first game of whatever it is, the sport that we love, and we had no clue about what it was. There was a time when I had never watched a Grand Prix. You can't just invent knowledge. You can't invent the history of watching it. And Formula One has a huge 75-year history. So how do we bring the new fans up to speed with 70 years of stuff they've never seen? And that was the idea behind the book. So it is a easily digestible, I hope, guide to what is Formula One today, how does it work, the basics, the rules, all of that kind of stuff. And then we go back through history and we do every single decade. And it's literally, how did the decade evolve from a technical standpoint, the technical rules and regulations, the drivers, the teams, the politics, the media landscape, the calendar. And then we look at every champion that was crowned during that decade, teams that define the decade, and a great race from that decade. And we do that for 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way through to today. And then we look at the modern era of the sport, and then we look a little bit to the future about what might be coming a little bit down the line. But each champion's kind of write-up it's only 400 words, so it's like a 2-minute read. So let's say you're online and you're talking about the greats, and someone goes, "Oh yeah, well, of course you're a Verstappen fan, you're a new fan. I'm a Jim Clark fan. You might never have heard of Jim Clark. Okay, so flick through the book, get to the Jim Clark page. 2 minutes later, you've got the basics." And so that's the hope, is that it sort of draws people in and brings to life this incredible history of this amazing sport.
Oh man, it sounds awesome. It must have been such a joy for you to put it together.
Loved it. Not so much for my wife. I started writing it on honeymoon. So, so that was good. She's very
You got to
understanding.
keep her. I'll put it that way.
Mate, long-suffering, very understanding wife. But yeah, so I really hope everyone enjoys it. We're launching it later this year. Can pre-order it wherever you buy your books from, anywhere in the world. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all those kind of places. So it's there, available for pre-order. And it's getting translated into different languages as well. So hopefully into whatever language it is that you want to read it in.
There you go. The Will Buxton dream expands. Look at this. Look at this career. Yeah. Again, man, can't thank you enough. I really loved it.
You're welcome.
Listeners will too.
You're welcome.
So. Now, for those interested in learning more about Will and his work, you can do so via X, Instagram, LinkedIn. You can also check out his personal website, wbuxton.com. And also, he does have a book out, My Greatest Defeat, Stories of Hardship and Hope from Motor Racing's Finest Heroes. And as mentioned in the episode, he has another book on the way called Grand Prix, An Illustrated History of Formula One. And for reference, all of this information, including the links, will be in the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share. To show further support, you can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And as I mentioned off the top, I do have that channel over on YouTube, lifeasa ... which hosts highlights from the main audio recordings. And if you do find your way over there, I would love that like or subscribe. We're trying to grow that channel out, and your support would be greatly appreciated. Now, finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as a, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.